Kabir Biswas, the founder of Dunzo, with us. Along with him, we have Ashish Fafadi of Bloom Ventures. So both of us, both of them, along with me, are going to talk about this company, the importance of growth capital, and many other trends which we're seeing in the venture capital space now. So my first question to Kabir. Kabir, thanks for joining us. The first question, maybe you can tell our viewers, how did this start? I have read stories about you starting a WhatsApp group in Bangalore, but the viewers would want to know a little bit more detail there. If you can help us.
Absolutely. I think I was just telling Ashish before we just started, saying this is the one story that I can tell. Glad to catch everybody. I'll give you like a quick 10-minute synopsis of how we got here and how it all started. This is late 2015, and I just completed my last startup that had actually gotten bought out by what you call another company. Wasn't doing anything for about a year's time, and I've been somebody who's lived in urban cities in India. Before this, I was in Gurgaon. Before that, I was in Bombay. And Indian cities are a little difficult. They take up too much time on a Saturday, Sunday to try and do the things you need to do in your own life. And for me, who had just been accustomed to using Uber, saying that, hey, you can press a button and get a cab to come pick you up. The thought was unreal that why can't everything else that's going on in my life also get done in that fashion? And it was just that one line idea on saying that, hey, if I can press a button and get anything else done within the city that I need to get done, and stuff that I was spending my Saturday, Sundays actually going ahead and spending my own time doing. We actually initially didn't actually go ahead and build a product, an app, or a platform, none of that. I was like, sounds like a good need, sounds like my need. I don't know if there are enough customers out there, and you want to be able to validate that. And so what we did was we actually started on WhatsApp. And I know nowadays WhatsApp is in rage in terms of being able to what you call try out stuff with APIs, etc. But 4 years back, there were no APIs on WhatsApp, and this was just hard work. This is people coming, registering on a site. We actually going ahead and adding them on WhatsApp, or people actually just finding this number out of nowhere and saying that, hey, can you do this for me? And literally the genesis of it started because I had 3 friends in Bangalore. I told them that I have this idea. I will get your stuff done. Why don't you send me what you need to get done? And within a 4-month period, we had actually gone ahead and really what you call rocketed to close to about 10,000 odd users in 4 months time. So this is 10,000 users on WhatsApp who can actually text a particular number without any backend, etc., and getting their orders done. Extremely chaotic 9 months, trying to really what you call get stuff done for consumers, figuring out what they want to get done in a city like Bangalore. People were largely using it for 2 big things. One was people wanted to ship packages from one point of the city to another, saying that, hey, I need to be able to send this to other part of the city. And the second thing that they were using it for was, this is a store that I know that I want something from. Why don't you go ahead and buy it and deliver it to me, right? And so those were 2 really, really big cases. That was about 95% of everything that people were asking. 5% used to be corner cases where they require literally all kinds of help and all of that. There have been really funny things that people have made us do. I remember on WhatsApp, somebody asked us to deliver cow dung. I also know somebody who had asked us to go ahead and move like a huge tree, like a potted plant, not tree, but it felt like a tree, I remember. So like a potted plant had to be moved from their house to Kaban Park. But I think one of the things that we kept at the core of the business since the top was, how can we make our users thrilled about using the product? How can we make it an astounding experience every time they try this product? And we have always over-indexed on being able to deliver an insanely brilliant consumer experience. And that's something that's not only started at the top of the business, but it's actually just baked into our DNA. As to how we think and how do we index on for our consumers and how do we want to deliver for them every day. Their need to do stuff and get stuff done is really the reason for the name, because we get stuff done, we are done so. It's also good that we could find the domain name for cheap, as well as it could become a verb. It was supposed to be a small name that you could go ahead and use as a verb. It was amazing to see it getting actually used as a verb within a year of launch in Bangalore. I got a really fun story. So we had just moved into a co-working space, right? This was our first office where we had moved into. And this was just when we were like 3 people. And this was when we had just raised our round of capital from Bloom. And I'll come to the story of raising capital from Bloom. Before that, you couldn't afford an office. Thank you, Ashish. So we were standing downstairs. And somebody's on a phone call and they're trying to talk to their vendor or something. And they're like, "Main Dunzo kar lega," right? And the fact that, and so he's talking to somebody on the phone and we are standing right next to him listening to this. It was phenomenal. And this is close to about 3 years back. And that feeling actually doesn't get old at all, even after being able to scale to millions of orders. The way we met, we raised our first round was actually even more fun. I remember Karthik, right, from Bloom. He was actually introduced to us by one of our very early users, like one of our top 10 users. And I think Karthik had actually traveled in, and at that point of time, Bloom Villa used to not exist in Bangalore. He used to actually stay with friends to be able to just, chill with them and be able to catch up with them whenever he was in town. And that friend's plus one partner told him about Dunzo, and she was like, my driver doesn't have anything to do because we now have Dunzo in the city. And I remember that's how the introduction happened. And I remember catching up with him and Sanjay at Cafe Coffee Day on Lavelle Road. I told him basically 4 big things that are true about this business even today. I haven't seen frequency like this. At the top end of the band, our top 15% of our users use us 28 times a month. On an average, a consumer uses us about 6 times a month. That's very high frequency in general. I hadn't seen retention rates like this. At that point of time, our month 7, month 8 retention rates used to be close to about 45+%. They're close to 30 odd even now. The third thing was, I think what people were doing was they were trying to save time with it. An entity which they couldn't price. So we had a lot of pricing power because of what we were delivering. Right. And the fourth thing, which was, I think, the most important thing that I think we figured out over the years is if you were to really extrapolate the world, maybe 10, 15 years out there, right? When you're actually interacting with your local world, you will actually stop searching for things. Why are you searching? You're either searching for content or you're searching for transactions, or to be able to transact with something, or you try to find something. Hopefully in about a 5-year time period, once you find something, you can actually go ahead and get it delivered instantly. Otherwise, why find it? And so potentially what you are able to do because of a service like this in a city is you're able to go ahead and replace local search as a concept for a lot of consumers. Saying, I won't search, I will Dunzo it. Right. And I remember telling Karthik these 4 things now close to about 4.5 years back. I know he asked me at the end of that discussion saying, were we raising money? And I was like, yeah, I think we had gotten to that point where we had 10,000 users. We were doing 150 orders a day, all on WhatsApp, by the way. So I remember while meeting him for like 45 minutes, I still was chatting with users because somebody wanted something. And he went, okay. And by the end of the day, and I don't know whether this is responsible behavior or not, Ashish should talk to Karthik. He went ahead and sent me what looked like a term sheet on SMS, I think. Saying, I don't know if you're raising or not, but this is what our terms might look like. I don't have a screenshot of that SMS. But we raised that round of capital with Bloom as well as Aspada Advisors. They were an impact entity who are based out of Bangalore. And so they were our first investors about 4 years back. We built a platform, we built a co-founding team, we built a product together. We spent 1.5 years to just get our product market fit right, on just trying to understand how do you build a 3-sided marketplace where there are users who are getting these orders done and they are paying for it. There are delivery partners who are coming and contributing time and they're making money per order. And then there are merchants who are getting additional demand because of a platform like Dunzo. And we are able to go ahead and make a take rate from them every time an order runs through them because of the platform. And I remember we spent that 1.5 years actually just tweaking the platform to make sure that we were able to turn profitable in our city of Bangalore. So we spent the first 1.5 years getting PMF, getting our economics right, and making sure that we were able to turn a city like Bangalore profitable. Right. 2.5 years back, Google, and this is Alphabet, which is the corporate entity, they actually led a round of capital with us, right? They are our biggest investor today. They own they own 25% plus of the company. I think, and I can't really speak on their behalf, but I think largely from the perspective that the impact that we have in local economies and how we can enable those many local merchants out there, right? What it means is it's an area of interest for somebody who's actually going ahead and wanting all of those merchants to go ahead and participate on their platform, right? And so there are multiple areas that we go ahead and now start working with over the last 2.5 years time. The last 2.5 years have been interesting. We have actually gone ahead and learned really how to deploy growth capital. There's been a lot of mistakes over the first 18 months where we went ahead and launched geographies incorrectly. We went ahead and maybe scaled too quickly. We went ahead and acquired consumers through wrong mediums and stuff like that. But one of the things that's always been true with the business and with the DNA of the organization is we are very, very frugal. We understand that this business is going to always be very thin margins. And because it's going to be really thin margins, we have always been that you need to make sure that every time you see something that's working, you go ahead and test it, correct it, optimize it, tweak it to perfection, right? And if you can't find the second or the third one, you drop it because it makes no sense. It's never going to make any sense. And it's okay to try out 1,000 things before one works. And I think over the last 2.5 years time, we have grown about 55x. That's how big the business is now. We run about $100 million of GMV now annualized. We have gone from 1 city to 8 cities. We have gone ahead and understood how you go ahead and deploy growth capital so that cities can turn profitable very quickly. Right. Just to give you a small example, Bombay is our last city that was launched, and Bangalore is our first city that was launched. The difference in capital efficiency between Bombay and Bangalore, for every dollar of growth that went into Bangalore, for the amount of revenue that we got, Bombay is actually 3x of that. And so we have gone ahead and launched about 6 or 7 cities to be able to learn that and get really, really good at it. The other thing that I think we have been able to figure out is exactly what profitability means at mega scale. Bangalore today is close to about $45-50 million annualized business, and it is EBITDA profitable. So what that means is we have taken something that was maybe $2 million, $3 million a year, gone ahead and scaled it close to about 15x, and still turned it back profitable while deploying growth capital in between. This business is pretty straightforward. Every transaction has 3 parts: user, delivery partner, merchant. Every time an order runs, users pay a small delivery charge, partners make money per order, and merchants pay us a take rate. For us, revenue comes from users, revenue comes from merchants, and our payout is directly to the merchant. We are able to drive about 20% gross margin in our most profitable geographies. And post after that, order costs as well as fixed costs for a city, we are able to drive close to about 5 to 6% of EBITDA per city right now. But largely what this means is that now we have a box, if you want to think of it, of a model in one city where we have gone ahead and deployed about $10 to $12 million, gone ahead and created a really large business, close to about $45 million worth, and that city is now profitable. We want to be able to take this exact box and now replicate it in about 10 or 11 cities in India. Some caveats into our business. Our business is very high frequency, very deep with our customers, but because we are hunting for delivery efficiency, which means that people need to live very close by or they need to live in very dense areas, right? It doesn't necessarily work in 400, 500 cities, but in 20 cities in this country, it will work spectacularly well because in every city, we'll be able to drive $50-60 million of GMV every year. Which means we can get to $1 billion of GMV very quickly. But beyond that, I think we'll have to go ahead and see a lot of Indian cities start getting more and more dense or launch more categories on top of the organic platform. What's our plan for next year? What are consumers really buying, I think, is more important than that's the first starting point. People largely buy in 5 big categories, right? People buy groceries, people buy fresh fruits and vegetables, people buy meat, medicines, pet supplies, and then everything else from a supermarket, if you want to think about it. What is Dunzo a replacement for? Dunzo is a replacement for 2 big things. One, you have been sent down to go ahead and get stuff and come back. Just go to the market and come back, no? And so Dunzo replaces that run for you. Or secondly, on a Saturday or a Sunday, you have had to go ahead and what you call run a chore somewhere far away in the city. Dunzo again replaces that transaction for you, saying you don't need to go there at all on a Saturday, Sunday. It can happen right now. Somebody will reach that pickup point in 5 minutes time and actually run this chore down for you. What we have also done since then is we have gone ahead and taken our delivery infrastructure and gone ahead and launched it for our merchants to be able to use it as a B2B express delivery service. So what we did was we took our biggest line item, that was a cost line item, which is about creating this delivery infrastructure, and gone ahead and made a revenue line item out of it by going ahead and allowing our local merchants to go ahead and use the same delivery pipeline. So coming quickly to what we think next year looks like, right? I think next year we are going ahead and projecting that our overall business actually grows by about 2x. That's what we'll go ahead and do. We'll go ahead and deploy close to about $40 million of growth capital. I'll be honest, our overall cost as a business is actually $1 million a month. Right, that's the fixed cost. What we now need to do is be able to literally grow the overall size of the business. This $40 million box that we have in one city, we need to go ahead and grow that in about 10 odd cities. And they need to go ahead and generate enough gross margin that our overall company becomes profitable. Right, and we are projecting that we can become an entire company can become profitable at close to about $600 odd million of GMV in about 24 months time, for which we'll require close to about $100 million of growth capital. We've already raised about $45 million of that. Our goal with this year was to get it to about $50 million. And so I think we'll try and close out the rest of the capital over the next 60 days time. But that's what the $50 million will do. It will go ahead and take a $100 million business to close to about $250 million business. And post that, we will require another $50 million to $60 million to be able to take the $250 million to close to $600 million. And at that point of time, we will have the entire company profitable. I think the point on frugality that I made on the top is extremely important. It's actually what is the discipline of being able to build these businesses in India, right? At the end of the day, in India is a massive market, but it's also really shallow in terms of consumers who can afford conveniences. The top 1% of India is people who make about 60,000-70,000 rupees a month. We need to get to about 4 to 5 million transacting users for us to become profitable as an organization. Today, we are at about 1 million transacting users. So in terms of transacting users, we need to get to about 4x. The interesting thing though is as we go ahead and scale the overall transaction platform, a lot of other revenue opportunities open up. The first one is we are really seeing brands come and advertise on the platform. Think of this as a distribution channel, right? Where local merchants are going ahead and participating and selling products. Think of it as a distribution channel, which actually goes ahead and takes away the actual idea of physical proximity completely away. So there is actually a brand in the country that has real world market share of close to about 80%, right? But on the Dunzo platform, their market share is close to about 55%. And the big reason for that is because on a platform like Dunzo, distribution doesn't matter. As soon as you order something, it will show up in 25 minutes time. So it doesn't matter if the item is available downstairs or not. It matters if the item is available somewhere in your neighborhood. And so what that does is for that brand to then have to start figuring out as to how can they start influencing consumer choice beyond distribution. And so they think of us as a medium where they can start advertising. So that's actually opening up as a large revenue pie, which will go ahead and support gross margins for us, right? Along with that, I think we're now starting to work very closely with Google and try to figure out exactly how we can support them in terms of being able to take search queries, etc., to be able to make them more meaningful. But that's something that I think we'll talk about when we are ready. But that's really what the business looks like. And the next year, I think we're just doubling down on the same business, deploying growth capital in an extremely frugal and an efficient fashion, things that we have learned over the last year. So the 10th city that we launch, our goal is to actually not just be 3 times that we were with Bombay. We want to be close to about 6 times. And so the growth dollar will get about 6 times more efficient than what it was with Bangalore, and 2 times more efficient than what it was in Bangalore, but then it was in Bombay. But that's really the goal. The goal is to go ahead and say that you run a really frugal ship. You build the right product and the right DNA and the right organization to be able to run an extremely frugal transaction platform. And while doing that, make sure that every dollar of growth that goes into the business is able to generate higher and higher revenue every quarter than what it did the quarter before that. And that's really what allows you to go ahead and see the compounding effects of how you go from what looked like a $25-30 million platform last year to now $100 million platform this year and a $250 million platform next year. But that's really the plan. I hope I caught all of that in 12-14 minutes.
Before Umang takes over,
Perfect.
And the question is, when are you coming to South Bombay?
And we have reached all the way till Mahim, yaar. Mahim Worli. We'll get there. Let's just give us. It's in the works. Hopefully in about 60 days time, man.
Awesome. We are waiting. So Vishal asked this question on the group.
He did. Okay.
I was asking on his behalf. I was not meaning to grill you on my favorite peeve with you.
No, not at all, right? No, I know there are small people, there are small experiments that are going on. NCR's got pitch going on. I'll be honest, I think we've just been able to build greater and better flows. And if you want to be really, really good with your growth capital deployment, you need to be able to do it micro market by micro market, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the only way to be able to make money in the long run. So we can, of course, launch. We can, of course, go ahead and get the first 1,000, 5,000 users also. But if you want to get to 50,000 users in a particular geography, that's not happening by just going ahead and launching. You need a plan.
The localization becomes the most critical factor in the process.
Absolutely, right? So literally, once we go ahead and decide that we want to launch a geography, 4 weeks before that. So we decide which geographies we will launch about 90 days before, right?
Yeah.
4 weeks before that, we actually go ahead and acquire merchants first. We don't acquire users. We don't acquire what you call partners. We acquire merchants first, because we have realized that the key anchor on this business is actually merchants.
So the fulfillment starts ahead of the customer acquisition.
Absolutely, right. And the other thing that we've actually been able to add to that, which I think is maybe an extremely India first innovation, and I don't know if anybody else has done it. So T-4 weeks, we acquire merchants. T-2 weeks, we go ahead and acquire partners. When we launch, for the first 4 weeks, actually, we don't acquire customers at all. What we do is we actually go ahead and open our B2B platform for our merchants to start transacting, so that they can start shipping the orders from their store. What it does is it gets the merchants habituated to the platform. It gets the partners habituated to the platform. It also allows us to go ahead and acquire what you call consumers, because people are just able to see the brand out there. Right. And we figured that this was the most cost efficient way to actually go ahead and scale, because for the first 4 weeks, we have gone ahead and built density without having to go ahead and actually spend $1 of growth. Right. And post 4 weeks is when we start acquiring consumers. So that's actually been a very interesting growth strategy by itself.
No, that's very, very fascinating about, trying to do it virtually. If I can, not that you have said this before, but virtually growing kilometer by kilometer. In businesses, it's about creating that network and making sure that gratification at the customer level is instant and there is no scope for bad reviews, because the kind of brand and resonance that the Dunzo brand has had, it's phenomenal. I'll hand it back to Umang. Thanks. Sorry, didn't mean to take
Thanks. Yes, just keep it free flowing as you're doing it so far. So, Ashish, a question.
I don't know. Either of our networks are bad. I'm not able to hear you.
I'm gonna go with Umang's network.
Okay. I think so. Is this better now?
Yeah, at least we can hear you. Of course, the video is not in sync with your audio, but yeah, definitely better audio.
Okay, sure. So, okay, quickly I'll put in the questions so you can continue. But by that time, hopefully my network should be okay. So, coming back on growth capital, Ashish, coming in right at the VC level and or coming in at Series A, B, and later, we've seen, at least our investors have seen that coming in Series A, B, and thereon gives you an exponential rise in terms of the IRR, and it's very, very short term in nature. You make an exponential return. What is your take as a VC? How do you see this? So coming on early vis-a-vis as a follow-on?
Sure. So Umang, I will divide this answer into two parts, and I will try and be very candid. So we actually trust the model gets proven when you are able to showcase to yourselves and our investors that your early stage portfolio, the first time when you made investments in a wide number of companies, that multiple is X. And when it comes to the IRR, the capital that went into series, the follow-on round, basically, whether it's a series A, series B, doesn't matter. It's all follow-on capital. The IRRs are nearabouts consistent. So the risk-adjusted return is what matters at that time. In the early portfolio, that could be about a third of the fund or 40% of the fund going into very early risk, where companies may be in the pre-product stage or maybe in the pre-revenue stage. Out there, definitely, it has to be higher risk-adjusted returns. If you're not going to be able to deliver that, definitely investors are not going to have any affinity for the model, and people are going to basically ask us the question as to why are you going in so early if at the end of the day the returns are going to be at par, the multiples are going to be at par. However, when it comes to growth capital, money typically ends up going after 2, 3, 4 years. A fund life is 10 years at an early stage as an early stage fund. The growth capital starts the deployment in the year 2 or year 3 and goes on till year 4, 5, and 6. So when it comes to multiple, definitely the growth multiple will be lower, but the IRRs will make up for it because whatever you see as a multiple will happen over a shorter duration. So if I have to summarize it, it's about the appetite and the risk appetite of the investors and the risk-adjusted returns commensurate with the risk. Both have their own merits. The multiples, absolute multiples of a seed investment, assuming we never invest in the follow-on round, are going to be higher than what would happen in a growth round. However, most funds will never ever run funds where they will only invest early and never invest in the follow-on. The idea is to make sure that if you have managed to get a Dunzo or managed to be on a cap table like an Academy or a Grey Orange, the idea is to make sure that you are as deep as possible and you are continuously playing the company throughout because you have understood the founder, the DNA, the vision, mission, and which the founder is tracking. So you will definitely keep going deeper. Historically, and Kabir can validate from his experience firsthand, historically, we have endeavored to come into every single round.
Absolutely.
Raised. And the only rounds that we end up missing rounds where we don't have handy liquidity at that point in time because of the small fund sizes that we offer. And when we, Umang, you know this, in the opportunity fund, as soon as that was raised, we allocated and Dunzo raised money twice thereafter. So philosophically, it's about time that Indian funds, which they are well managed, they will deliver upwards of 25%, in the range of 23, 24, 25% and upwards at growth stage also. In fact, if you go by the track record of what we did together at the opportunity fund that we raised 2 years ago, it's already tracking a 25% IRR. So what I'm trying to emphasize here is it doesn't matter what the multiple is. So far as the IRR is delivering and it's holding up, I think it's all good.
That's perfect. Thanks, Ashish. I'll just switch back to Kabir. Kabir, you spoke about the simplicity of your business. About the 3 pillars. So I just wanted to get a sense on how much of an impact do you make on the merchant. So I'm sure because of this convenience, his business would have gone up tremendously. So for example, let's take a fruit vendor or a vegetable vendor. I think the amount of orders would have exponentially risen, or how does that impact the business of that person?
So one of the things that we aim for is after 3 months of launch in a particular geo, that geo should be able to go ahead and all of our investments should have been done, and the geo should be able to grow by itself. One of the key, what you call, inputs into being able to do that is with your top merchants, which is close to about 15 to 20 odd merchants, you have to become about 20% of their overall business, right? At about at about 20-25% of business, what tends to happen is you end up having significantly better bargaining power with them. And secondly, they also consider you as like a partner. And then they take care of your orders a lot better. They are able to service customers a lot better. And so it's literally an action item into being able to go ahead and make sure that, geography is properly launched. If you don't do it, then what tends to happen is that you need to go back again in 6 months' time and try to go ahead and fix all of these issues, right? And so that's literally a part of our launch playbook by itself, where this, what you call, us being able to go ahead and become a key part of our merchants is extremely important. One very interesting thing, and I think given the date and time and place that we are all in, we should talk about COVID, right? COVID has actually been difficult on the supply chain part of the business, but it's been actually very good for the overall health of the business, right? Where the merchants that we work with, our bargaining power with them has actually become significantly higher. What we have been able to do is been able to keep their stores functioning when they were actually not able to go out and see any kind of offline walk-in customers. And finally, what you call, we have been able to work with them to try and smoothen out their own supply chains. So in fact, in Q2 and Q3, we must have been some of the few businesses in the country that have actually grown literally 25% quarter on quarter. Right, and that's actually been largely on the back of two big things. One, there's been a massive shift in the way consumers are actually transacting with their cities, and secondly, the fact that because we had these ongoing merchant relationships, those merchants figured that we were their primary way to go ahead and sell, especially when the store shut down. So both of them were actually fairly useful.
Thanks, sir. So Ashish, quickly back to you. So of course we know Bloom as a very, very early stage fund. And then when you come at this stage for various companies, of course you've got a lot of winners like Dunzo in your portfolio. How does, what kind of hat do you start wearing, and how do you start seeing things differently?
So Umang, the endeavor is not just blindly piggyback on a follow-on investor's judgment call. While there is a necessary condition for us to come in, especially when we are allocating from our growth funds. If we are allocating from our core fund, of course, we'll go by our own conviction. There are enough companies where Umang, we have gone and bridged the founder, and there may or may not be any other follow-on capital chasing us. But when allocating from the growth capital, it's very important to make sure that you are doing alongside a certain commitment that you have made to the LPs. And by and large, the approach that we have taken is that it will always be follow-on capital that will follow another investor as well. And that is the best way to manage conflicts. So the first principle that we always go by is that what is our understanding and comfort with the founder and the leadership team. And by and large, of course, founders have reciprocated with respect to their love for us as much as we love them. But at the same time, when it comes to follow-up capital, it is very critical to understand the extent of the team build-up. Is there a team at play which can take the business from, let's say, 50 million or a $200 million company and a business to maybe a unicorn? There is a certain DNA that is required. There's a certain staying power. Staying power is not about just the financial prowess of the founder and money in his bank account. It's about the gumption and the conviction with which a founding team, along with their CXOs, operate on a day-to-day basis. Given the fact that we are fairly involved, and again, Kabir is here, feel free to keep me honest, our involvement between the leadership would be on a once a month at the bare bones. Hopefully, in many companies, it's about once in 2-3 weeks. This is whether it's a WhatsApp conversation or an email or a call. In some form or the other, somebody from the senior team is in touch with the founder at that level of pace. So we understand where the team development and where the founder thesis in his head is or her head is. The second criteria, Umang, is whether the current revenues indicate that the business has matured or it is still at the product market fit stage. If the business has kind of resonated with the customers as well as it has done for Dunzo, there's no reason why replicating into another 6, 7, or even for that matter 10, 12 cities is not going to be a challenge. The whole thought process of the founder is going to be on optimizing logistics and making sure that the nuances city by city are cracked. All of these learnings are not part of a copybook. All of these are going to only come with the founder as they build the business. So how quickly they make decisions and how they scale, how they treat the capital, and can there be a 10x in jump on revenues visibly over the next 10 years, 5 years. And the next jump has to be keeping in mind that the other quality of matrices have to be consistent. In consumer companies, it is about the frequency of the transactions, it's about the revenue per customer, and bunch of other metrics. In a B2B company, it will be lifetime value of a customer, churn, etc. So what are the quality of the metrics? Where are they trending towards? This is the second criteria. And the third is, after all of this, you're doing it for appreciation. Is there a 5x which is visible or not? So the hat is very different as compared to when we come in early. When we come in early, it's about the founder, it's about the co-founding team and the market size. When you're coming in at the later stage, which is typically a series BC, you're thinking about, the question is the market big enough for the business to now grow 10x from here on? Can this business be taken all the way to hopefully an IPO? And if it does not go into IPO, how fail-safe is an outcome going to be by way of a strong M&A? How is the founding team going to take some of these decisions and how they're going to scale? So it's a very different dynamic. And it is hard to really not get influenced or biased. But the idea is to try and be objective, which is where broad-based decision-making comes into play. At an early stage, one of the partners sponsoring the investment, other partners may have a strong view against it, unless it's a credibility challenge or a red flag on integrity or a reference check not working out. We will always go through with the consumption of one partner. When it comes to follow on, you are talking about all the aspects of the company. You are talking about a business which we are investing into and not just a founder. Of course, the founder is a very integral part of the business decision. He is going to still be very central to the whole thought process, but you will definitely not ignore other aspects and matrices which I elaborated earlier.
Great, Ashish. Kabir, I just wanted to get back into the unit economics which you mentioned. So uh, maybe I was doing a comparison. You can of course correct me if I'm doing a wrong one. So I was just checking with the likes of food delivery apps which do food, and when I look at you, you can actually do everything. So you probably have a 6 to 7 times market size in that terms when compared to only food. Right? I mean, is my understanding correct if I look at it that way?
Yes, technically the surface is literally local commerce, no? So 97% of India's commerce is unorganized. If you to really ask me what we're trying to do, is we're trying to create and organize that, right? And basically all of these transactions that are happening in the offline world start happening online. And basically, what are the three components of an offline transaction, right? One is search, second is payments, third is delivery. Right? If you can bundle the three of them up together to be able to go ahead and deliver to the consumer, they don't need to do an offline transaction, right? We basically sit at the cusp of these three things. The product is what you call listed, so search becomes easy, discovery becomes simple, payment is clearly now a solved problem in this country, right? And then lastly comes delivery. And one of the things that we are realizing is the key component of being able to bring unorganized commerce to the consumer's doorstep is actually delivery and not necessarily just search and payments, because the physical aspect of doing the transaction in this country is very high. Right. So 100%. But if you have to ask me what you call, honestly, I do think food delivery, the way it is constructed today in this country at the average order values that it is constructed, it needs to go ahead and do a few more categories for it to become viable, let's be honest. Because standalone, what tends to happen is it has far too many peaks for lunch and dinner, and then the delivery partners are not utilized really well. So what we are able to do is we are able to drive significantly lower cost of transaction, which is our delivery partner cost per transaction, because our delivery partner is much better utilized through the whole day because of the nature of transactions that we have, rather than the massive spikes. It is though a little bit of category creation, right? So I think consumers need to get educated, they need to understand, but once they go ahead and do it, then their frequency and their retention numbers are just out of the park. So yeah, fundamentally much bigger surface, and the cost economics are significantly better.
True. And when I look at probably the size of the market here, so this is all media reports and food delivery. So I think both of the large players were doing more than 1 million orders a day pre-COVID. I mean, that's what the numbers it could be lower now, and probably on the path to recovery. But when we look at yours, so the sense I was trying to get was if they do 1 million orders, you could probably do much more, because you could
Yeah.
also cater to food, and you could also cater to other things, as you explained. So maybe if you can give a sense of what kind of numbers are we doing now, if you can share them with the viewers, and what kind of numbers
Sure.
are you doing, and what are your future plans?
Cool. So pre-COVID, clearly, I think what was happening was that order volume was scaling really, really quickly. Revenue was scaling a little slower because I think average order values were something that, new users were really, because we are acquiring a lot of new users at scale, right? So I think at that point of time we were doing, and so we are much smaller though. We are in about 8 odd cities, and properly rolled out about 6 of them, right? Food delivery companies are close to about 400 odd cities, if anything. So we were closing in on about 100,000 orders a day. That's how big we were. The interesting thing that COVID's done is we have recovered to about, actually not recovered, we were always at about 80% of the order volume, because 20% of the geographies, 30% of geographies actually just shut down. There were areas which just got cordoned off, right, because of red zones, etc., etc. And they're still coming back up in all of these cities. We went there, but the revenue actually is up by about close to about 70%, because average order values went up dramatically. And so even when comparable food delivery businesses, etc., are maybe at about 75% of their pre-COVID volume numbers, or 60% of the pre-COVID, we are actually on revenue about 175% higher.
Perfect. Yeah. So questions are also coming in. I urge all the viewers to keep asking, and I'll, at the end of the conversation, ask Kabir or Ashish the questions which you put up. So coming back, to more details. So when you say 8 cities, so maybe some plans on number of cities, and what kind of number are you looking at post say end of 21? Some feelers there.
Super. So our early plans for 21 will get us to about 10 cities. On the outer side, we'll get to 12. There are 2 key aspects to this. One, in 2 of the biggest, cities in this country, we actually aren't at 100% coverage, which is Delhi and Bombay. So Bombay is close to about 60 odd percent, and Delhi is close to about 40 odd percent. So just scaling those 2 cities out because of the landmass that they are, right? And you going one neighborhood after another, has its own time that it is going to take, and we'll go ahead and launch 2 more cities in the due course of the year. The one big caveat into being able to do 12 cities is there is clearly migration that's happening in Indian cities right now. Right, there are people who are just choosing to live outside the city till they actually really need to come back. Our early estimates are that that in extreme cities like the metros, migration is close to about 15 to 18% of the number of people who were actually using the app, and in smaller cities it's close to about 10 or 11%. Right, so like a big aspect of us going from 10 cities to 12 cities is hopefully we go ahead and start seeing reverse migration happen. Right, because otherwise it's going to go ahead and start us chasing geographies that aren't going to be dense at all. And until we don't see the density come back, I don't think we'll go ahead and launch those. So those 2 big aspects in 10 for sure, but for 12, I think we'll have to go ahead and just figure out reverse migration. A large part of the first quarter is those scaling up Bangalore and NCR completely.
So questions are coming in, fast, but I'll probably ask one question, then move on to the questions which have come in the chat window. Read something about drones. I mean, you were one of the companies which were allowed, usage of drones as a proof of concept. So does that at some stage reduce your reliance on the partners, or it's way far away?
So before COVID, we thought it will happen in about 2.5, 3 years time. Because of COVID, it slowed down a little bit. But if you were to ask me 2022 end or 23 start, we do expect to see some commercial operations possible, because there is a lot of policy push to be able to get this done. I potentially think if you can actually go ahead and execute on the policy, your requirement to build roads can actually be lesser. Technically, because a lot of the traffic that's actually traveling longer distances within cities can actually go ahead and be through an autonomous device. Coming to the delivery partner aspect of this, right? we actually don't think the houses or people where they live are ready or are going to be anytime ready to be able to go ahead and get doorstep delivery via drones. It's just the way houses are crammed in India. So what we actually expect is to go ahead and have multiple what you call drone spots or hubs or what you call delivery locations within the city. So suppose if you need something to travel from, let's take an Andheri to South Bombay, right? What will happen is somebody will actually pick it up from Andheri, drop it off to the Andheri, what you call port. From there, you should be able to see a drone that goes off to South Bombay. And then from South Bombay, the last mile is still done by a human being. What it will mean is the longer distances are not done by human beings, right, or delivery partners. But we actually see the fact that because cost drops so much because of something like this, we should potentially be able to bring a significantly larger amount of traffic online. And people will be able to think of, just imagine, no, something from Andheri to South Bombay coming to you in 40 rupees, right? And coming to you within the next 45 to 60 minutes time. At 40 rupees, you will never think of going ahead and what you call having to, ever commute or even figure out an alternative. Today, it costs you about 200 bucks. So you might still think of the fact that is there an alternative, but at 40 bucks, you won't think of an alternative. So because of the amount of traffic that we expect to go ahead and multiply, we think that the last mile delivery from these people will still continue to be as significant.
Phenomenal. That's really phenomenal. Let's just start reading out the questions. The first question comes from Mr. Ranganathan. Does Dunzo help to do bank transactions like deposits, withdrawals, etc., and are they very secure?
So technically not, right? Partners are not allowed to go ahead and what you call draw money from the bank or carry alcohol. Those are the two things that that regulation doesn't allow for, right? Because these are marketplace and stuff like that. I do know people using it to deposit checks, which is fair, but the cash withdrawal by itself is something that's actually technically not allowed. Even though we are a marketplace where people can go ahead and use the delivery partner for anything at point A and then deliver it at point B. I think we have gotten policy opinion, and that policy opinion says that these are the two things that we should train Dunzo partners against. So every time a partner gets onboarded, we actually go ahead and train them the fact that they can't do these two, and they politely go ahead and tell the user that they can't go ahead and run this.
Second question is a revenue model. I think you had already touched upon that, but maybe if you just want to repeat
very quickly, right? Every transaction has three parts to the problem, right? There is a user, there is a delivery partner, and there is a merchant. Some of the transactions which are just about picking up and dropping from one place to another just has a user and a partner. In the second kind of transaction, which is like a courier transaction, there's only one source of revenue, that is user, and one source of cost, which is partner. Right? Every time 100 rupees gets paid for delivery, Dunzo keeps 20 rupees and gives the 80 rupees to the delivery partner. That's our revenue, right? The second type of model is when people are buying from local stores that are listed on Dunzo. So think of it as a 100 rupee order, so a 100 rupee item that's getting bought, and 20 rupees is paid for delivery, right? From the 100 rupees that goes to the merchant, we get 10 rupees, which is 10% is our take rate from the merchant. So that's our revenue. And then again, from the 20 rupees that's going to the partner, we make again 2 rupees because 20%, 4 rupees. So what do you call 20%? And so that's our revenue. So we make money from the user, we make money from the merchant, and our cost is the delivery partner.
Perfect. What are the entry barriers, if any, for new players to enter this business? So by the time Kabir answers the question, please keep sending your questions, and I'm reading them out right now.
No, absolutely. I think there are two large aspects to this, which I think you need to be able to experience the product to be able to really tell, right? Actually, three. The first one we truly believe is the organization that you create for this business. This is not about going ahead and creating a product on the ground. This is about going ahead and having the discipline of being able to run a scalable organization. Anybody can run 10,000 orders. To be able to run millions of orders is really where the challenge starts. And that requires you to be frugal. That requires you to test everything. That requires you to be really, really smart as to how you go about deploying capital. That's the first one. That's actually a massive entry barrier. The second one is what is your strategy with being able to go ahead and acquire consumers and grow your geographical spread? We believe today that most likely we have the best answer globally for being able to go ahead and grow from one market to another, to be able to deploy literally less than $10,000 to be able to create a micro market, and boom, it can go ahead and become a $500,000 business in about 12 months time, because we did that $10,000 really, really smartly. That is a literally a secret sauce that we have been able to create, which I know globally nobody has been able to. Everybody's been able to go ahead and just pour tons of cash to be able to do it, right? And cash is not a good answer, because as soon as you take it out, traffic goes away, which is what a lot of platforms are going ahead and seeing, right? That's the second one. The third one, and which I think is the most important one, which is, by the way, if you have to think very deeply about it, Amazon's moat. It is about being the most consumer-centric organization in the world. You have to deeply care about every order that runs on your platform. We internally track something that's called a perfect order. And by perfection, we mean not just transactionally, we mean aspirationally. This is what a user should, experience when an order actually gets delivered. We have been able to increase our perfect order percentages, which actually dropped off dramatically because of COVID, by about 2,500 bips in the last 7 months time. And that's largely come because we just went ahead and focused on making sure that local merchants understand the importance of being able to transact on platforms like ours, and go ahead and make sure that every order is being run in the same fashion that this customer was theirs. And that has allowed us to actually go ahead and have retention rates that are actually fairly industry beating at this point. Just to give you a small example, 100 customers actually, if they transact with us this month, right, 85% of those will actually come to the app next month and try and transact with us, right? These are numbers that are unheard of in terms of as to what that kind of retention can look like, right? And that's coming out of the fact that we do the first, second, and third really well.
Okay. So next question is there any global comparison to Dunzo? Is there any other company like that?
So there are two, I think, which you could index on. From a multi-category perspective, we think that Gojek comes really is, I think, the world leader in terms of as to how do you run multiple categories. I think Gojek as well as Meituan out of China, those both would be very interesting comparables. But specifically for what are anchor use cases, right? Because India is different, right? Gojek is largely around bike taxi, and in India, bike taxi is actually not allowed in most of our cities. Our anchor use case, though, seems to be something which is about buying from a convenience store. So imagine if you had 7-Elevens in every corner, and these 7-Elevens could deliver, right? And that's what the anchor use case seems to be. In that particular use cases perspective, which is about 65% of the business. Comparables would look like GoPuff in the US, would look like Getir in Turkey. Those are two big comparables, we believe.
Right. One question I had before I go on to the remaining questions. There was something which I was reading on Dunzo Business. Right? So what's the plan there?
Oh, the B2B part of it, right? Yeah. I mentioned this earlier, right? So what we did was we got a very high frequency use case that allowed us to create a delivery layer, right? Now we have delivery partners in the neighborhood who can actually go ahead and run these orders down. For us, being able to go ahead and become partners with our local merchants was really important, and also sweat the asset more, right? Because now this asset has been created. So what we did was we went ahead and launched a B2B express delivery service with our local merchants. These local merchants are not getting all their orders from Dunzo, right? They get orders on WhatsApp, they get orders on phone calls, right? And these orders still need to be serviced by maybe somebody who's in the store, right? Some staff who's going to go ahead and deliver. And these people are going to be inefficient. What we let our local merchants do is go ahead and use the same delivery infrastructure, not pay us a take rate, but pay us for the delivery charge only, right? But again, go ahead and deliver in about 30 to 40 rupees, which is actually going to be literally impossible for them to do, because they have people who are full-time. We are able to pool into a marketplace, find you the best partner, and just deliver it. So it's a significantly better, efficient use of the asset that we have gone ahead and created. I'll tell you why we went ahead and did it, right? I think as a transaction platform, right, which is trying to go ahead and make sure that that users are constantly having a great experience. Everything that we do is to be able to make sure that we are able to acquire consumers at scale and grow the overall size of the platform. We have costs in doing this, right? We look at these costs and say that, hey, you know, what is it that we can do to go ahead and make them cheaper, or go ahead and make them more efficient, right? I think there's a very interesting comparable that I think Amazon did with their AWS business. One of their biggest costs was really to be able to create servers, to be able to handle the traffic that they had. And they actually went ahead and took that business and said that, you know, we need to create these servers. Let's just go ahead and create it for millions of users out there so that when we need it, they're actually available. And so we'll create a marketplace for it. We basically took that line item of saying, okay, delivery, what you call personal is what we create. And we made a line, what you call revenue line item out of it. We told our local merchants to use those delivery partners. And suddenly all the free time that these delivery partners had, and we had to pay for it, that free time actually became a revenue line item for us, and we were able to go ahead and amortize it. So that's our plan with it. We actually want to go ahead and become partners with our local merchants. They shouldn't look at us as only place that we can go ahead and get additional demand from, saying, you know, my relationship with Dunzo is to get additional demand. That's a terrible relationship to have, because they will always try and cut you out and say, you know, can I go ahead and get this demand from somewhere else? We want to partner with them so that we become a solution provider for them. So not only do we get additional demand, we actually service that demand. And the same delivery infrastructure also allows you to service your other orders that you might have, right? That's the plan with this, where we actually go ahead and next year assume that till date, our existing merchants have gotten delivery, right? Next year, we will go ahead and acquire merchants only for delivery. And those merchants, after they go ahead and use us for delivery, will start then showing up on the primary platform with their selection. So we believe that it will then allow us to acquire merchants at scale for much cheaper.
Right. So we are, inching closer to 6 p.m. I just ask the last two questions and then invite, Ashish to kind of give his closing remarks. So quickly, both the questions together, Kabir. One, any potential competitor coming up and growing fast and giving competition to you? That's one. And second, I think you did mention about that. So have you achieved break even? Or you did mention that Bangalore's already.
I'll talk about it.
Yeah, you did that already. So over to you, Kabir.
Super. Quickly on competition. I'll be honest, we are in the business of actually making consumers' lives efficient, right? And making sure that they have what they want to buy, it gets instantly delivered to them. Today, on a weekly basis, we deliver close to about 20,000 SKUs to our users. This used to be about 10,000 SKUs last year. So as selection has gone up on the platform, people started buying grocery and fruits and vegetables and meat and medicines, but now they're buying mascaras, now they're buying power banks, now they're buying books, and all of these are getting delivered within 30 minutes time, right? The best way to think about it is competition is going to come from most likely two places. The food delivery businesses, and we actually believe that it's most likely only Swiggy who needs to be able to do this, because delivery is their primary business. They need to be able to go ahead and start figuring out as to how they can use the delivery platform for other use cases. And so we believe that that's competition from a year, 2 year perspective, right? At this point of time, the most interesting thing about this is that we are actually most likely better capitalized in terms of runway. And secondly, we are much more focused on one category, whereas they have 3 or 4 fronts open, where they need to do food delivery, they need to do a cloud kitchen business, they need to do grocery, and so stuff like that. So that is, we are very, very focused in being able to create one category. If you were to really extrapolate this 10 years out, honestly, you're going to get big enough for Amazon to want to come and compete, because 2 large aspects to it. One, it is the same set of consumers that Amazon has for its long tail purchases, right? Second, our frequency with our customer is higher on a monthly basis than Amazon has on a yearly basis, right? And fundamentally, Amazon is in the business of 2 things. They sell stuff to you, they move stuff around. Dunzo's in the same 2 businesses. We sell stuff, like merchants can sell stuff to users, and we move stuff around. right? It's just that technology allows it to happen in 30 minutes time, where Amazon uses an extremely web 1.0 model still, where stuff gets delivered to you in about 36 to 48 hours time. But if you were to extrapolate it 10 years out, we believe that's really what competition looks like. We just have to stay ahead of them.
Thanks, Kabir. Ashish, closing remarks.
Thanks, Umang. I think very well articulated, Kabir. Thanks. So broadly, Umang, I would just quote the very quick summary. So over the last 20 years, you would recall we used to have technical analysts talking about technology as a vertical. Fundamental analysts will talk about technology as a vertical. Today, tech is a horizontal. Every aspect of the business is taken to tech. It is only a matter of time. It's only a function of how savvy the businesses are in adopting it and how quickly they can adopt it. So I think the way to go is tech. And we definitely feel very strongly that Indian investors, particularly families in India, HNIs, ultra HNIs, have been part of the early story with direct angel investments, but those have been far and few in between. A large portion of wealth definitely is there, but a small portion coming into or allocation into tech-oriented businesses would do a world of good to people. And we definitely feel strongly that we are not far from the peak. We have seen what the last 5 years has done in our own fund one. When we compare returns and traction that the companies have had from 2011 to 15 versus 15 to 19, it's almost 2.5x. That's the time taken for a company to reach from 0 to 1 million is almost 35 to 40% of what it would take earlier on. So we have reached a decent momentum, and regardless of what the investor thesis is, to the extent it is a small portion of the overall portfolio, definitely we feel in a sweet spot. India is at a stage where the next 10 years definitely overall positive, and tech is an ultra positive. So we definitely feel strongly about it and are going to double down on it. Looking forward to more people joining the journey.
Thanks, Ashish, and thanks, Kabir, for joining us today.
I want to be able to add one thing to what Ashish said.
Sure.
Right? There are no more technology businesses. You just run a category on top of technology. And I think that's just really the world that we live in 2020. All right.
That's what I meant by saying it's a horizontal. It's no more a vertical.
Yeah, there are only technology businesses, and that's just a given at this point of time. And it's not because I work in tech, etc. I worked at Airtel. That was my first job out of campus. It's the only way that you can think of the world. Why would you slow yourself down if computers can do it for you?
Absolutely. So with that note, I thank everyone for joining today. I think I took most of the questions you guys had asked me. If I missed out on something, please reach out again and I'll get the answers for you. Thank you once again, Kabir. Thanks, Ashish, and thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks.